Welcome to the Cowboy Up Podcast, where talk is all about the West. This episode is brought to you by White Stallion Ranch and produced by Cowboy Spirit USA. Annie Oakley, Sacagawea, Big Nose Kate, strong women of the West most of us have heard of, but there are so many more. Bob Boze and Jana Bommersbach saddle up to the ranch for a lively, entertaining chat with Russell and Alan about their new book, Hellraisers and Trailblazers, the real women of the Wild West.
Well, Alan, good morning. I guess one of the things we have in common among many is I think we're both raised by pretty strong women. Of course, that's ranching.
Yeah, that I was going to say, if you could stick it out on a ranch, you are strong. And so I was always kind of amazed at my mother. She always dressed in nice clothes and looked like she just stepped out of downtown Los Angeles, but ran a beautiful home on the ranch and never seemed to work hard, but got more done than anybody I know. So even at a young age, I was kind of in awe of her.
You know, my dad would go to Seal Peterson's, which was the upper level women's clothing here forever and ever and ever, and always went and bought her clothes. She never bought them herself, but he'd go and get them, and if they didn't fit, she'd go back and swap them. But she always looked very, very good, and occasionally put on the ranch clothes. But and of course, the old story that the punchline was, she said, "I'll let you buy this ranch if I can wake up every morning and look at those mountains." And so my dad knew she had no sense of humor and built those floor-to-ceiling glass wall all across the south of her house. And I think people loved her because of her strength and dignity and grace. And I know your mom was the same.
I think a strong woman makes a strong man. So I'm a believer in that.
I think my dad was just lucky to survive. So anyway, our guests today sure know strong women. They co-authored the book Hellraisers and Trailblazers, Real Women of the West. Bob Boze is back with us. He's the editor and owner of True West magazine. We had a great interview 2 years ago talking about all the hats he's worn in his career, and artist and editor and everything else. And I know a lot of people like to go back. That's episode 27 of season 1. So 2 years ago, you can go back and check out Bob. Jana Bommersbach joins us for the first time. She's an acclaimed journalist and prolific writer of articles, investigative stories, novels, including she does children's books. 2020, she was inducted into the Arizona Women's Hall of Fame. Like Bob, she's a resident of Phoenix, and we're really excited to have both of them here. And, of course, they're going to be back in Tucson, or they're going to be in Tucson March 4th for the Festival of Books. Hello. Good to have you.
Hi. Well, I already love you guys.
Well, yeah. We're tickled to have both of you on the program today, and glad to hear what you have to say.
That's great. You know, any man who admits that a strong woman makes a strong man or a strong man is made by a strong woman. I'm in love with them already. So we're good. We're very good.
That's the Jana I know and love. We worked together at New Times at Hippie Rag in the Valley, if you've ever heard of it. And we shared an office in the Westward Ho Hotel on the second floor. And I remember having to step over bums to get into the office. And my biggest memory is that the only difference between the people that worked at New Times and the bums is that the bums had better taste in pants. But those were wild times, and we go way back to there. And so when it came time to want to do this book on women, I knew there was only one person to call, and that was Jana.
Well, and it's so timely. I mean, people want to read about that.
Isn't it right? I mean, it is like so. How could history have been so stupid to ignore these great women all these years, all this time? I mean, people in the West, I think, we look at our own history and we cherish that, and so a few people might know some of these women, but I'm going to bet you most of your listeners don't even have a clue who most of these women even are.
Right.
And that's a shame.
And you're right. And I mean, it was a bad business decision. I'll give you a quick example. Prairie Lily, I'm looking at her picture to my left in our Longhorn room here, and so she went up to the Cheyenne Frontier Days and said, "Hey, I'm entering the bronc riding," and they said, "Run along, little lady," and she goes, "No, I'm entering," and they said, no, run along. And she said, "Well, I'll tell you what, get out your rule book and show me where women can't enter, and I'll walk away peacefully." And of course, she'd done her research, and they didn't know what they were doing, and they were sure there weren't going to be allowed women, and there was no rules against women. So she entered because they stuck to their word. And the bad business decision prior to that was people loved watching women ride broncs. And so for a long time in early rodeo, when they could compete relatively evenly, they became a star. And I'm talking about they, collectively, women. So including everybody makes it better for
exactly.
Even for
and in
business.
fact, you hit right on with some of the most phenomenal of Western women. Do you know that the rodeo queens were the first professional female athletes in North America?
Who kept that record?
They led women into the field of athletes. They also were the best paid women in America. They got higher salaries than almost anybody. Annie Oakley, by the way, when she was with Buffalo Bill, she was made more money than anybody else in the entire troop except for Buffalo Bill. I mean, they brought pants to women in public. I mean, these rodeo girls were not only out there in the middle of the ring doing outrageous things, and beating the pants off some of the men sometimes too, but they also were trailblazing in incredible ways all across the whole continent.
Well, I just had a really good time going through your book, and each page was a different story and a different woman. What was your favorite? What one stood out when you were writing this that you thought that you'd like to recount?
Well, every page you read was my favorite. Every page you read was my favorite. I mean, honest to God, Bob, I don't know, do you have an actual favorite in here?
I would have to agree with you that there's probably 90% of the women in there. I just love them all. And you and I have talked many times about how the book could have been probably twice as big. We just didn't have the space to do it. In fact, it led to a lot of angst on our part because we were trying to defend to get as many in there as we could. Right. Yeah, I think right off the bat, I think Annie Oakley saying, I'm not afraid to love a man. I'm not afraid to shoot him either. I mean, you can't make that up, man. That is so cool.
Isn't that cool? Or how about Terry Nation saying, I'm a bulldog running along the feet of Jesus, barking at anything he doesn't like. I mean, what kind of ego do you have to make that kind of a statement? My God.
Who said that? Who said that?
Terry Nation. Terry A. Nation. God. The woman who shot up the saloons and was trying to get Kansas to abide by its stance against alcohol. I mean, she was outrageous. I mean, I just can't even imagine somebody with that kind of ego. Well, I can because I researched her, but my God, I don't know anybody with that much. I don't think.
You don't watch the news then.
I guess not. No, I guess I could. I guess, okay, we won't even go to that. But, yeah, I guess lately I could have said I know a couple women just like that. And, oh, my God. Anyway.
So who's the great Western and what's the big deal and the biggest leg? And what? Tell us about that.
Well, first I got to tell you that is one of Bob's favorite lines, that she's got the biggest leg in the West. I mean, that's how I was introduced to Sarah Bowman. She's got the biggest leg in the West. Like, so what the hell does that even mean? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What does that even mean? And so then I thought, oh, God. And he kept telling me what a great, you got to really get to know her. And I thought, oh, geez, she's just some kind of idiot, right? So I get to know her. And my God, I'm in love with this woman now. What a phenomenal woman. So Bob's led me down, I was down some paths that I didn't want to go, and I'm sure glad he did. He's the guy who brought me to the dance, and I'm still dancing with him, and thank God. But she was this Anglo woman who just decided to be her own person. First of all, she was huge. She was like 200 pounds. She was like 6 feet tall. So they named her after the biggest ship that was on the ocean, which was called the Great Western. So then it was a joke-like name, right? Sarah, she was so big. She was just she was much bigger than most of the men in Pershing's army. Was it Pershing? No, wait, it's not Pershing. Who is it, Bob? Anyway, she was in the army, and she, huh?
Yeah, in the Mexican War. Yeah.
In the
so
Mexican
that'd be
War,
Pershing, right?
No.
Or no?
It was Pershing. Okay, in Pershing's army, and she.
It was not Pershing, but
no.
Anyway.
Anyway, we'll figure it out. So she fell in love with him, but he never loved her back. But she admired him so much, and so off she went with him. And then she decided she wanted to continue being part of the soldiers thing, and said, well, you can't do it because you're a single woman, and you can't be running around here with all of our men. So then she went around and she says, who wants a woman with $15,000 and the biggest leg in Mexico? And so that's how she got that line. And so some little skinny guy stepped forward and said, I'll be your husband. And so they, she took him and then got rid of him when she found another guy she liked more, And she ended up in Yuma, of all places, which was nothing but a horrible fort at that time. I mean, a desolate, ugly place. Made her life there. Ended up being part of a lot of history that we never knew about until recently. And I was so happy to discover her tied to some other really historical figures. And she's the kind of woman that you just have to say, you know what? Damn it, I wish I'd have known her.
Wow.
Yeah, it was General Zachary Taylor.
Taylor. Exactly.
So it was Mexican War, you say. It wasn't a punitive expedition. Sorry.
So she's early, which is unfortunate because there's really no known photos of her, but there's these really outrageous descriptions of her, that she was bigger than life. She carried 6 shooters. She took care of everybody. She was, she's the one who said, I have the biggest leg in Mexico. Do you want the biggest leg in Mexico? And that's what I love about her and so many of the other women in the book, is that they're so feisty. They're just bigger than life, and especially in a time that was very, very tight-laced and compressed for women.
Right. There's also a great story about Doc Holliday one time. She was a great cook, I guess. And I guess some guy had complained about her cook, and he pulled a gun on the guy and said, you want me to eat that? And he said, oh, no, it was the best food I ever had in my life. So, so people loved her and protected her. And she's the only woman buried in the Presidio, the only from that era. She was buried originally when she died. She was buried at the Yuma, in the Yuma cemetery. And then when they dug up all those graves, they took her to the Presidio with all the other men. And her casket was by far the largest casket. And so she also had the distinction of being there. And one guy said if she hadn't had a reputation of maybe being a prostitute now and then, that she would have been considered the greatest woman soldier in American history. Now, how about that?
Yeah.
Which of you selected the title to the book? I love it. Hellraisers and Trailblazers.
Well, there's a story. So, actually, I had come up with the idea for the book in 1994, and I just had the most clever title that I just thought was going to just be a barn burner, and the title was Wild Women of the Wild West. Well, when I finally got around to doing the book, and I called Jana and asked her if she wanted to come in. She said, yeah, I'll do it, but on one condition. And I said, what's that? And she said, I don't want that title. And I said, why? She said, Google it. So I Googled it, and there must be 7 books out there with that exact title. this clever title that I came up with, 28 years ago, was absolutely a joke now. And then we went through so many titles. At one point, it was going to be called The Real Women of the Wild West, and both Jan and I thought, oh, man, that's just a little flat. And then I think we had Spit and Grit, and we had, what else did we have, Jana?
Oh yeah, we had Audacious Women. We had all kinds. But I got to tell you this: Bob Bell is of the theory that you ask everybody you know how to title your book, and then let them all weigh in. So he had people weighing in all over the country, and and so people were giving us all kinds of lace and buckskin and we had tons and he'd throw all of them at me, and I'd say, oh God, oh God, oh God, and thankfully. We had Trailblazers kind of early, but not as a title, but we had it as one of our subheads, was Trailblazers. And then Bob was invited to do a art show at the Pippin Museum in Prescott. And so when he was sending off his summary to the museum, he just slapped on a title, Hellraisers and Trailblazers. And when the museum said, why isn't this the title of your book? And he went, oh my God. So he texted me. We already had the book set, right? The cover was already set, right? Oh God, the poor people who work for us, my God. And he called me and said, what do you think of Hell? I said, oh my God, that's the perfect title. And so of course we had to fix everything and change everything. And that was total ruckus with the rest of the crew, but it was the perfect title for the book.
Perfect.
It's a fun book and a great book.
Thank you.
We're going to take a little break right now, and we'll be right back, but we've got a little 5-minute segment that we have to do in the middle here.
Well, and we're going to have, Alan, one of Bob's colleagues, Stuart Rosebrook, is going to preview what's next in True West magazine, and, that's always, I just got one, and great photographs and all kinds of stuff. It's always a highlight to make your way through True West. It's always something
magazine.
New. That's perfect.
It is.
So on to Stuart.
Your favorite?
Yes.
Great.
Maybe that says bad things about my taste, but nevertheless,
no, it says fabulous things about you.
Pretty high praise
things about your taste.
From Alan Day, and we're going to hand it off to Stuart.
Well, once again, great program. Obviously, we always have fascinating people, and, here we are, right at the True West story, and we're at the True West time in our program. Every second program of the month, we invite Stuart from True West magazine to come in, and Stuart, are you still there?
I am, and we are honoring our 70th year as a publication, kicking off 2023 with a special collector's edition. It's our Best of the West issue, which we do every year. And this year, in 2023, we are celebrating the very best photographs from the True West Vault. And it's our largest issue of the year. And we have published some of the rarest and most interesting historical photographs that our editors and contributors chose for us in this issue. And it's really a remarkable issue. I think people will read it over and over, and I'm sure it will remind them of some of the great Time Life Western books from years past. And we really like to celebrate historical photography at True West, and from the first page to the last, people will discover some of the most interesting photographs taken in the Old West.
Well, Stuart, it sounds like this isn't a magazine this month. It sounds like it's a coffee table book. Is that right?
Well, it definitely will have a long shelf life, and the issue has we try to use historical photography also to illustrate our Best of the West lists, and I think that we provide good captions and credits, and I think that almost every one of the historical images could lead people to wanting to know more about the subject or the topic that we cover in the photos. Some are very rare photos, some are photos that are rarely seen, and in one instance, a photo of Belle Starr is a very rare photo that has not been published very much at all. And we also try to celebrate some of the great photographers in the issue. I have a great interest in some of the great photographers of the surveys after the Civil War, who were some of the first to record the natural wonders of the West. And so readers will see some wonderful images from Yellowstone and the Snake River, photographers like Timothy O'Sullivan, who carried a camera so far into the outback of the West. It's really, people will be fascinated by the images.
You know, I can say this as a longtime teacher, and I can think that I know this, that if I were teaching a class on the history of America in the West, I would have it very, very easy to do, because all I would have to do is give my students a copy of the magazine, and we could just talk about the pictures and the stories there, and they'd probably get some of the best education around. Is that right, Stuart? That's how I feel.
Well, I agree, Stan. I think that the using, people learn in so many different ways, but we live in an era, and most of us who have grown up reading magazines, going back to Life and Look magazine, and we realize that these image makers, these photographers, like the early artists who traveled the West, like George Catlin, we owe them all such a great debt for their courage and determination to get the photographs. And we have no idea how many, never made it back because they fell off the mules, or a boat tipped over going down the Grand Canyon. But these men, and later women who joined them as frontier photographers, they knew they were doing something special, and they used the latest technology, the largest format cameras, and they carried them up mountainsides and across valleys and mountains and rivers, or they set up shop on the edge of frontier little villages that were just popping up all over the West. And many of them were the first to photograph many of the great American Indian leaders and the indigenous people. And again, without their determination and belief in this new technology, we wouldn't have such a great window into our shared history.
Courage, creativity, confidence, brave men and women. Stuart, this has been fun. Obviously, we have to tell people how they can subscribe, but particularly, this would be the great time to subscribe or to buy that special issue. So how do they do that? Well,
the issue will be on newsstands until February 14th. Which is also Statehood Day in Arizona.
That's correct.
And truewestmagazine.com. All one word, truewestmagazine.com. And it's a great place to go to get your subscription. And if you want to read 70 years of magazines, make sure and click on the subscription that gives them access to the archives. We have every issue organized as a flip book, and you can go in and read the issues going back to 1953.
Thank you so much. We'll see you again next month. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
Hey, you guys you talked about, you quoted Annie Oakley, I'm not afraid to, what was it? Kiss a man, I'm not afraid to shoot him.
Yeah.
Related to that, who said I shot him because I love him, damn him?
That's Jenny Rogers, who was a soil dove in Denver. And I just love that quote because it's so, she found her bow, in bed with another soil dove. And so she shot him. And so the police said, why did you shoot him? And she said, and I quote, I shot him because I love him, period. Damn him! Exclamation point. That is the classiest quote ever.
I think I agree.
Did she go to prison for it, or did they accept her logic?
She's in the book, and we talk about her and Maddie Silks and a couple of the other soil doves. And Jana and I had a little bit of a
dust up.
Jana.
We had a little dust up over this thing because he wanted. It seemed to me that the prostitutes and the soiled doves and the bad girls, they're the only people you know about the Old West. You know, Calamity Jane and the soiled doves and Maddie Silks and those guys. And I was pushing for all the women you never heard of before. And Bob said, we got to have both of them. Well, of course he was right, but I hate to say that. Don't let him know I said that. So anyway, so we had, I was like, you're wasting pages on these women. I don't want to waste pages on these women. I want my women to. So anyway, so we had quite some discussions. Now you got to recognize that Bob and I have loved each other forever and ever and ever, and have known each other for almost all of our adult lives. And this was like, collaboration is tough when you've got two strong people, both of whom have their own vision of what's going on. And thank God our vision melded enough times that we created this fabulous book.
Yeah.
And we lived through the times that we wanted to kill each other.
Well, the thing that we have to add in there is that this was a pandemic project. It was done during full pandemic mode, and everything we did was on text and email and Slack, which is a cousin to Zoom. And I just absolutely hate it because it's like it's just an anathema to any kind of communication. Somebody in the middle of the night, I would get a text from Jana. Well, that's BS. Don't say BS. The full word. I wake up and I go, that's it. What does that mean? Rather than her and I talking, it was just these like ethereal things would drop out of the sky into your phone, and we had to try to do the book in the middle of that. And man, it was not easy, and it did strain our relationship. But at the end, we could laugh about it, and the book's better because we both fought about it.
Right.
And now there'll have to be a second one. But tell us. We'll do it live next time.
Dana, tell them why there won't be a second volume.
Because I'll never collaborate on a book with Bob Bell again.
That's a whole nother story.
There you go.
That's worth a whole broadcast
story,
right there.
That's a whole other broadcast.
So there's episode 2 and episode 3, Bob's and Jana's separate. So tell us about Olive Oatman.
Oh my God! Can I tell this? This is, this is one of the great treasures of this book, is that everybody's had a chance at Olive Oatman. I mean, every writer I know, Western writer I know, has written about her, and Bob's written about her 5-6 times. I mean, this is sort of Bob's story. And at first I said to Bob, well, you probably want to do the Olive Oatman story. And he says, no, why don't you take a pass at it? And I thought, oh, thank you, God, because I've always wanted to get into this story, because I've always thought that this story wasn't complete, that there was a lot more depth to that. And my background is in investigative journalism, and so I'm like into digging into the wells, into those little dark spaces where there's 4 words and you celebrate for 3 days because you learn 4 new words, right? So I started digging in, and I went to Yuma and did a whole lot of research at their archives library, which is a phenomenal archive. If anybody needs stuff in the Western Arizona, the Yuma library is your treasure. You should not ever forget it. And discovered all kinds of incredible things, and then kept going on and kept finding little pieces here or there, and then an investigative reporter always says, and so what if, and then you go down a rat hole that nobody else would go down, and that's where you find all the good stuff.
Well, Jana, can I interrupt just really? Our listeners are from everywhere. Give a quick summary of the Oatman story so they know what we're talking about. Okay,
you got it. I'm so sorry. Olive Oatman was a 13-year-old girl whose family was on a quest west alone in a wagon train alone. The family was slaughtered by Yavapai Indians in 1854, and she and her little sister were captured by those Indians and carried away. She spent a year with them and then was taken by the Mojave tribe, which had seen her and offered her a better life, they said. And they came and got her and took her up to what's now northern Arizona, Needles, California, that border up by Parker and in that area, to their reservation, where she spent the next 5 years, and then was eventually returned to white society. and wrote a book that became a national bestseller. She became a big speaking tour person, the whole thing, telling about her captivity. She was the most famous Indian captive in American history.
Did both sisters survive? I know the story, but I just want.
Yeah, the other sister did not survive. The little sister was sickly and, in fact, died when they were with the Mojaves.
Okay.
So Olive alone survived. But her brother, who they thought had been killed with the parents and the other family members, he had actually survived, and he was looking for his sisters the whole time. And eventually they all ended up in Yuma. That's where they brought her, where they were reunited. And then that went on to become the book and the tour and the whole thing. And so she became this international this national sensation. But there's always been questions about her life with the Mojaves and how ingrained she was with them. And the big question was, did she, in fact, marry an Indian man and bear his children? Now, that would have been absolutely the kiss of death back in 1858 when she was found. There was such fear of interracial communication between Indians and white people that here's how bad it was. Custer told his men that if Libby Custer were ever to be captured by Indians, they were to murder her instead. Wow. Because it was the fate worse than death, they called it, which was, and you can guess what that meant, right? So the idea that a white woman could fall in love with an Indian man, that she would love him and would bear his children, was absolutely unacceptable. And so she always denied that she'd ever been molested in any way. She never addressed the marriage and children. She just said, I was never molested, and I don't think she was lying. But I do think that there is another depth to this story that we talk about in the book that brings you into a whole new understanding of what was happening with this woman who spent the rest of her life in a very melancholy state. And I don't know how much you want to give away about the whole story, but it's a phenomenally interesting story. And it brings in, of all people, our Sarah Bowman, whose role in her life has been hidden for years and years and years, as though it were another little dirty sin on the side. And so my story eventually brings all these pieces together and is the longest piece in the entire book and is the culmination of the book. So we hope that everyone will want to read the book just to read that story alone.
Yeah. And by the way, Sarah Bowman is the Great Western, the woman with the biggest leg in Mexico.
Right.
Right. I was in Oatman, Arizona. Is it named for them or no?
Yeah, named for her. And in fact, one of the reasons it's named for her is that the Olive Oatman story plays also into Arizona statehood. You know, Arizona, and this is one of the things that I pulled together how you do a timeline. Timelines are crucial when you're looking at the West, because whatever else is happening in the West at the time affects everything that's going on. So Olive Oatman's, they named Oatman after Olive in hopes that to show how magnanimous they were. And Olive Oatman's story was a piece of what was going on in the fight for Arizona to become the 48th Western state. So it's got a really rich point in history.
Well, and so all that research that you feel you filled in some of those pieces from your investigating at Yuma Library is going to be in the book.
It's all in the book.
So if Olive Oatman is teasing anybody, there's reason number already quite a few to get Hellraisers and Trailblazers. Big picture question. How would you define the difference between Western women and Eastern women in that period of the 1800s?
Can I take this, Bob?
Oh, yeah, you go.
Totally different women. Now, the white women who came and the black women who came were all Eastern and Southern women, right? The Mexican women and Indian women were already here. So they already had established their role in the life, and we travel through that. And you see the unbelievable strength of those Indian women and Mexican women as they were doing their own thing. But here come the white women and the black women from the East and the South. They're migrating to the West, right? Some of them come kicking and screaming. Some of them come happily, because the West offered to them a brand new level of freedom. The East was embroiled at the very moment, the early 1800s, the mid 1800s, in the Victorian era, and the constrictions on were unbelievable. They were like strangled. They weren't allowed into schools. They weren't allowed into professions. They were supposed to stay home and learn how to knit and how to paint. They couldn't own any property. They weren't involved with their children. They of course couldn't vote. They couldn't serve on juries. They weren't allowed to speak in public.
It was the American Taliban.
That was exactly that's a good way to put it. Absolutely. I'm going to steal that. That's how they were treated in the East. Well, here they come out to the West, right? They come out to nothing. There's no supermarkets. There's no highways. There's nothing. The saloon is the only institution, right? So they first create, schools and libraries and churches and they try to provide a society and they demand sidewalks on those dirty, filthy streets because their skirts are getting, they're out there. They're building the houses with their husbands. They're ranching, they're plowing, they're your mother and your grandmothers, like you were talking about at the beginning of this show. They were the strong women who had to do everything the men had to do, as well as bake the bread and card the wool and
now don't
and
go
weave
too far
and
here.
all that stuff. They had to do everything else too on top of that. So these women were not about to be taken second place, right? So this is why in the Western United States, by 1914, every Western state was giving women the right to vote, except New Mexico. The national amendment wasn't there until 1920. So, and the first place to do that was Wyoming in 1869, 50 years before suffrage, before women got the right to vote in the country. Wyoming women were voting. Wyoming women were judges. Wyoming women was the governor. Wyoming women were mayors. I mean, women in the West were having roles that Eastern women sat back and said, "How the hell are you doing that?" I mean, they were astonished at what was going on. The West gave women a ray of freedom that women had never known anywhere in the world before. And that's one of the reasons I just love the West. Even with all of its warts and all of its sins, boy, man, it recognized talent when it saw it. And it wasn't easy. The men weren't just handing these things over. Women had to fight for them. But the women had the gumption to fight for them. And they fought and they won. That's why they're Eastern women and Western women are different.
Did Charlotte Hall pull a gun on President Grover Cleveland in 1911?
Bob, you take this.
Yeah, that is true. You got one word wrong in there. Let me tell you what really happened. Okay, so Jana and I are doing Charlotte Hall. We love Charlotte Hall. She saved Arizona. You got to read the book. You want to know how that happened. But I had remembered that I had read somewhere that she pulled a gun on a ferryman, and I thought, it's just so that this historian, this woman, pulled a gun on it. So I mentioned it to Jana, and Jana said, "Oh, Bob, where did you hear that?" She was a little bit irritated with me, and I said, I gotta seek this out. So I called the Charlotte Hall Museum. Their researcher there said he'd get back to me, and sure enough, here's what happened. Okay, Charlotte Hall was doing a book, and she was researching it, and she was up at Marsh Pass, which is west of Cayenta, Arizona, and a runner came from Tuba City. There was no communication out there. It's 1911, and he says, your mother, Charlotte Hall, is on her deathbed. She's very sick in Prescott, and you need to get home if you can. So she has her guide pack up her wagon and is going to take her from Marsh Pass, Cayenta, basically, to Winslow to catch the railroad. They get out into one of the passes, and here comes a storm. And if you've ever been up in that country in a storm time, those washes can really run, and he won't cross a wash. And so her aide, the Navajo that was guiding her, said, "I can't go on." And she pulled a pistol on him and said, "We're going." And his name, you can't make this up, his name was Grover Cleveland.
Oh,
okay?
my God.
Really?
He wasn't the president, but you can't make that up. And so I did a painting. The painting is when Charlotte Hall pulled a gun on Grover Cleveland. And it's at the Phippen Art Museum if you want to go see it.
I'll be darned.
Jana, you discovered, I'm told, an historic woman who history tried to erase. Is that true?
Yeah. That's absolutely true. You know, I mean, history forgets women all the time, but history doesn't always try to erase them, obliterate their story altogether. But that's what happened to a woman named Laura Nihill in Jerome during territorial days. She owned a newspaper in Jerome, Arizona, which was then the height of these silver mining that was going on there, Clark's Mine, which became the richest silver mine in the world. And she was faced with her competitor, the guy who owned the other big newspaper in town, claiming that the Chinese restaurants in town were serving filthy meat in their restaurants and demanding that they be shut down. And the main Chinese guy named Charlie Hong, he came to her and said, "Hey, listen, this is a lie. This is a lie, and he's just trying to get me out of business because his friend, the sheriff, he was actually a deputy, his wife wants to open a white restaurant. They called them white restaurants then. Wanted to open a white restaurant, and they want to get rid of me because I'm the most popular restaurant in town." And she stood up for Charlie Hong against the most powerful newspaper in town. And in fact, it got so bad that there was fisticuffs in the streets, and then there was a libel suit against her, and eventually, all this stuff goes on. And this is happening all in 1909, the summer of 1909. I found her from 131 words in the back of a book. And I was sure that she'd probably be a famous person, that everybody would know about her. I couldn't wait to get back and research her, only to find out that nobody knew about her. I mean, here was a journalist that was being courageous, standing up for Chinese in the middle of the Chinese scare. This is when, the Exclusion Act was going on. The whole thing about the Chinese was very negative. Almost every newspaper you would find in Arizona at that time were calling them by terrible names and were saying they should be thrown out of the country and that they should be restricted and not allowed to do anything. They weren't allowed to marry white people or anybody else. It was a terribly prejudicial time against Chinese people. And here this white woman who was in her 50s is standing up to the power structure of Jerome and the newspaper in Jerome to stand up for the Chinese guy. Now, I thought that was pretty damn courageous. And so I spent 5 years finding out about her, and her whole story's in our book.
Perfect. Well, we can't miss talking about the female Apache warrior who doesn't always get credit deserved.
Oh, I know. I know. We love, her name is Lozen, and she was the Apache Joan of Arc. And Bob and I both think that she's just a phenomenal woman. She was fighting for her land against the white people that were coming in. That whole conflict. It's so sad that both sides couldn't have figured out a way to negotiate. But then you look at today and you say, we still haven't figured out a way to negotiate. We're still all fighting, our own. You know what I mean? It drives you nuts. When you look back on history, you say, well, this simply could have been resolved this way. Well, then you look today and say, well, it could just be resolved this way too, but we're not doing that yet. But yeah, she was a magnificent woman who was a healer, a spiritual guide. She was Victorio, the chief Victorio's sister. She was the only woman that was actually allowed by the chiefs to be an actual warrior. Most Apache women were not allowed to do that. They were trained in how to survive, but they weren't allowed to go the next step and become warriors. Well, Lozen was approved to be a warrior, and she pledged that she would never marry, and she would always fight for her people. And she did. She was sent off with Geronimo when they were exiled in 1886.
Well, we're my wife has a horse called Lozen.
She does.
We know a little bit about the Cochise Geronimo and the whole southeast Arizona. Anyway, and big fans of Lozen. Tell about how she would. She was good at predicting where the chasing cavalry were coming from.
Okay, she would stand in the middle of where they were with her hands up, and she would circle around, and eventually her hands would get flaming red. And she would say the enemy is coming from there, and she'd point to there, and she was always right. I mean, she did have a psychic ability about her. where she could figure out where things were. And in fact, when her brother was killed in battle, she had been taking a pregnant woman back to the reservation for her to have her baby there. And they were on the flee from the reservation and had been out, and she left to take this woman back, and that's when her brother was killed. And they claim that they always have thought that if Lozen had been there, she'd have saved her brother because she'd have known exactly where the danger was coming from. But yeah, she had some pretty remarkable powers, that's for sure. And I'm so happy to hear your wife has a horse named Lozen. Oh my God, that's so cool.
Yeah, no, we're kind of fans. So we've established, we're running out of time. We've established no more collaborations. So
but we still love each other.
So, so what's next for both of you?
Bob?
I'm head over heels in love with the Jesse James story. I'm going to be doing that next year. Got some new information on who actually killed Jesse James, and it wasn't Robert Ford. I'll leave
No! Really?
Yeah.
It's a tease.
Yeah.
Jana, what do you got cooking?
Okay. Well, I've got a whole variety of things happening. I mean, I'm starting a new podcast series. They're talking to me about doing a new television show, interview show. I'm of course still looking at my women of the Old West and figuring out who I like. I'm really loving Polly Pry and Nellie Bly, those two women, two fabulous journalist women. They're both in our book. And I had not known about Polly Pry until this book. So I'm reading about them. So you never know where I'm going to go next. But this is a great time of exploration for me.
Terrific.
Well, Bob and Jana, we've just been thrilled to have both of you on today. And you're such a fountain of knowledge to give us that my mind's just spinning with everything you've told us.
Well, and anybody who wants to, of course, they can get the books and go to True West and get Hellraisers and Trailblazers. But Tucson Festival of Books, one of the biggest in the country, March 4th down at the U of A. And you guys are going to be with Wynn Brown and Chris Enns. They've both been on the podcast. And your super editor, Stuart Rosebrook, is the moderator. And that's going to be at 4 p.m. March 4th down at the U of A. It's a big festival, so you'll need to get directions to get there. I'm sure it's going to be a hit. Big festival down there, March 4th. Also,
and a little preview is on March 1st. Tombstone's having its first book festival, and Wynn and Chris and I are all on the program, and I'm sure Bob will be too. We're going to be talking about books then. So Tombstone might be a nice place to go on the 1st of March.
Yeah, 1st of March, Tombstone. What a great thing for Tombstone to do, a book festival. So March 1st. Tombstone, Arizona. So thanks again for being with us. We'll look forward to seeing you in March and also back on the podcast for the next
Can't wait to meet you in person. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
All right.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm still smiling, and it's a good thing my microphone was turned off because I was laughing a lot. What a wonderful program. And that's what we have at the Cowboy Up podcast, and we're glad that you are with us. And by the way, guess where it takes place? Right in the western world, the true western world of the White Stallion Ranch, right here in Tucson, Arizona, one of the classic historic ranches, and they do it just great. And so you need to think about that. Let's plan right now, coming up this spring, this summer, maybe even plan a year ahead to take the family, or maybe your business could use a little different business retreat. Well, White Stallion Ranch is the place for you. Russell True and his family, they will make sure that you have true Western hospitality, and it will be a lifetime, a great memorable experience. And who knows, you might even drop in and be on the program. So why don't you think about that and take time right now to go to whitestallion.com, and look at that fine program that they put together on their web stage. And why don't you talk about it and make a decision to join us right here at the White Stallion Ranch.
You know, Alan, I was kind of taken aback when I don't think it was laws maybe, but it was culture, listening to Jana talk about the onerous restrictions on women's lives in Victorian America. And you know, I guess when you step back and you look at history, and you think that, oh, this group or that group has some sort of higher ground. Well, you know, everything sort of cycles around, and the idea that women's lives were so heavily limited in the American East, and that some of them gave up everything to come out west. And you know, my great grandmother was the first female school board person, and ended up running the juvenile court system in Colorado Springs. And those folks came from the East, and those women came out to have freedom and fulfill their promise. I'd never looked at it that way before, and it's really interesting.
Well, of course, then here's bragging, but, you know, my sister Sandra that grabbed on to just being bright and whatever, did she think ahead of time she was going to be the first woman on the Supreme Court? I don't think so. But when did that idea come about, and how did she position herself to take that opportunity and make it come about? And but you know, women in the West have done that again and again and again. You know, taken hold of an idea and taken it forward and put women in the picture with that. And I'm kind of amazed at some things that have gone on that brought women's place forward where it should be.
Well, and given today's fascinating podcast, it now seems to me not just something I'm proud of on behalf of your family in the West. It now seems much more appropriate that America's first Supreme Court justice came out of the American rural West.
I like that a lot. Yeah. Well, I've always been proud of Sandra, as you know, but went to see her, by the way, day before yesterday, and had a nice visit with her. She's failing a little bit, but still, it was just a joy to see Sandra, and we communicated.
Perfect.
That's a wrap from the West, where history is made every day. Check out Hellraisers and Trailblazers. Full color photos, full info, and fully worth it. Thank you, Stan Houston and team, for producing this episode. If you love us or even like us, give us a rating on Apple. Big cowboy appreciation for doing so. And join us next time for more interesting talk about the West. Until then, I'm Lynn Weezy Sneed, reminding you to stand tall and ride safe.